Welcome to the Uncommon Living podcast, where we host dialogues in human resilience. My name is Thomas Seager. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University, and I'm the CEO of the Morozko Forge Ice Bath Company. My guest today is Jeffrey Hartford. Jeffrey was diagnosed with a tumor on his kidney, and he refused surgical treatment. Instead, he's treating his own tumor with a combination of circadian therapy, light hygiene, diet, ivermectin, fenben, and cold plunge. You might think he's courageous. You might think he's an idiot. His doctor has implored him to undergo the surgery, and at every opportunity, Jeffrey has refused. He shared with me his latest lab reports and imaging. He tells me that his tumor is shrinking. Jeffrey Hartford, thank you for joining me on the Uncommon Living podcast.
My pleasure, Dr. Seager. Thanks for having me.
Well, I invited you because you told me that you have a tumor on your kidney, that you were diagnosed by a urologist who recommended surgery, and you said, "No way am I going to let you cut me open." And some people would call that courageous, and some people would call that foolish. What are you thinking?
I've been called both. That's an accurate statement. I'll be honest, it's really interesting. Even at the instant I was diagnosed, I had a palpable rush of energy through my body. It started at my feet, and I just a rush, and it was pure peace and calm. And I knew in that moment that I would be all right, and that I was not going to go any standard of care. And that's what I told my doctor. And I smiled. I said, "Doc, I know this is not going to sound normal. I'm not going to be your average patient." I said, "But I feel this is a gift. And I am not going to be scheduling an appointment for surgery with you. No disrespect to you. He's a wonderful guy." I said, "I'm also not going any standard of care." I knew in that moment that I would be okay. I would be able to heal from this. And this was my opportunity to lead by example and show people what the human body is capable of.
Well, here's the spoiler alert so far in this podcast. You've been doing ice baths every day, and you sent me some images showing that your tumor is shrinking.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
Yeah,
what was it measured when you first imaged it, and what is it measuring now?
Oh, that's a great question. The specifics I'm not good with. All I know is when I look at the report they send me, it's really interesting. As you said, some people call it courageous. Some people call it just absolutely crazy and what's wrong with me. This process has been something that I've just known this is my journey to go on. I've made a lot of lifestyle changes too, and I've been in the fitness industry for over 20 years. And I'm just a student of this. I've made so many mistakes over the years, but this is just a sense of knowing. So when they send the report, I use the urologist in his office to get approval and do the scheduling essentially for the MRIs. And then through my portal, I get the whole write-up and report. And I look down at the findings and I see the numbers. And the numbers had been, this by this by this. And then on my second or third reading, I actually recall seeing the numbers very, very slightly increase, at least on one or two of the measurements. But to me, I just felt like there's no statistical significance. So it's not a concern to me. To me, that meant it didn't change. And in this last one, they dropped back down below the original findings. So to me, I see those numbers drop. That tells me that tumor is smaller. And oh, by the way, I go by how I feel. The original diagnosis was a little over a year ago in June. It all started. The reason I got looked at was because I had some blood in my urine, no pain, no issues whatsoever outside of saying, "Hey, that shouldn't be there. That looks a little weird." And then, as we all know, our standard of care system, when I made my phone calls to get looked at, I didn't get looked at. That was originally actually back in April of 24. I didn't get looked at until much later, and I didn't get my diagnosis until mid-June. So, it's just one of those things. I already felt like I was on my own, and I took that as a blessing. And yeah, I mean, a lot of it for me at this point, it is so unscientific. It is very spiritual, very much rooted in this conviction that's a slightly less than, religious faith, but faith nonetheless. And I just know what the body's capable of. I've been digging deep into this quantum biology side of things and how to get reconnected with nature to give the body the inputs that it needs to heal. And as you and I discussed on my podcast, getting cold is one of those things. So getting in that plunge, I mean, I think over the past 90 days, I've averaged 6 days a week. There was about a 70 some odd day stretch where it was every single day and 34 degrees as you recommended in 4 minutes. I'm averaging some days 5 or longer. So yeah, direct answer to your question. I can't give specific numbers, but the tumor is smaller than it was. And to me, that's a wonderful sign.
What did your doctor say to you when you refused their recommendation for surgery?
That's a great question. I want to start by saying he's a really good guy. He's doing for me what he was taught to do, and I don't want to knock him at all. But what did he say to me? He tried to say everything he could think of. He did follow-up appointments with me to have my wife come with me to try to get her. And as we see in our paradigm, he was using fear to try to scare me into it and telling me, if it were me or if it my brother or anyone I care about, they would be on the operating table. I would be on the operating table. I said, I believe that. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. I said, but that's just not my thing. And I'm certainly not going to go in a direction just because you're trying to scare me there. We have so many examples of people who have overcome things far more serious than this, not to mitigate it. I mean, the differential diagnosis is clear cell renal cell carcinoma. So it is that big old C word that some people shy away from. And to me, that's not a death sentence. It's your body trying to tell you you're doing something wrong. There's a role that I played, and not the least of which was drinking a lot of alcohol and having late nights and overindulging and being under artificial lights late into the evening for years. Was I 43 at the time of my diagnosis? I'll be 45 this upcoming December. And man, I feel better than I did in my 20s because I'm treating myself a whole lot better. So yeah, he said quite a lot to me. We had multiple follow-up appointments where he continued to try to convince me. And every single time I smiled, I said, Doc, I appreciate you, but we're not doing that.
I saw you this summer in Tennessee, and you look great. You don't look like a cancer patient. You don't look like you're 45. You could be in your early 30s. You've been in the fitness world for decades, and yet you're sort of confessing that there were some things in your life that weren't right. And maybe you're thinking the tumor resulted from the drinking or the late nights or the light environment. We don't know. But you decided to make more changes. You decided that you weren't all the way where you wanted to be when you got this diagnosis. And you might as well explain for our audience what this foolhardy, fearless approach to treating your own cancer is like. What were those changes, Jeff?
Let's think. So I had years ago, I already made quite a few changes. This coming January will be 3 years of no alcohol. So that was well before the diagnosis. I already knew I was on the way. And as a result, I was feeling a whole lot better. This has definitely lit a fire to do a little more reflection and to think back. And you think, wow, cancer, this is interesting. You listen to Dr. Cruz and what radiation can do, and we're surrounded by it, all these non-native EMFs, right? That's got to play a role. Careful how I word this depending on where you're uploading this. But again, with Dr. Cruz and the different vaccines out there, the different things that are put in there, when those ingredients are exposed to radiation, that's shown indications that's triggering a lot of tumors and cancers as well. So maybe that plays a role. But my attitude is I'm not a victim here. I look at it through the lens of quantum physics versus Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics taught us cause and effect. But just through observation, I love to use the example of smoking and lung cancer. So, well, if it was cause and effect, then I smoked from 16 to 19. I was up to a pack a day. Why didn't I get it? My mom smoked from 12 to when she passed at 65. She didn't have lung cancer. Why didn't she get it? And the list goes on. And then you hear stories of people who did get lung cancer and never smoked a day in their life. So if it's just cause and effect, that just doesn't explain it. But quantum physics tells us it's about probability. And when I think about it through that lens, I think about it in terms of, well, boy, I've done a lot of things in my life that increase the probability of this happening. And sure, I've done a lot of things that decrease that probability, but not enough. So that's the way I look at it is, okay, let's continue to eliminate the things that I've done or may still do that increase the probability of it. And let's continue to stack that list of things that decrease the probability and increase the probability that my mitochondria and the rest can do their job to take care of this, go through a little more apoptosis, go through a little more autophagy. So yeah, I leverage getting in sync with the circadian rhythm. I'm up for sunrise every day. I'm out there soaking in that sunrise with naked eyes, with as much skin as I can expose while grounding, bare feet on my front yard. We've definitely done some work, and there's more to do in my household with changing the light bulbs, changing the artificial lighting that we've got. What spectrum of light are we using? Really trying to get the family to help me out. I'm generally the first one in bed at night. Sometimes as early as 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I ask them, hey, can you unplug the Wi-Fi router before you go to bed? Let's mitigate the exposure we have to those EMFs. A local seasonal whole food diet as often as possible. Every possible thing I can think of. And then I go on a deeper level from an emotional side. I came across the work of this gentleman, Richard Mote, who had done a lot of research into the specific organ in the body that has the tumor and the connection to different relationships. And I knew instantly. Now, I'll preface this with saying that my mom and I had an unconditional love for one another, but we both had such a degree of insecurity, especially in my youth, that we would battle even though we loved each other. So when I came across Mote's work, I said, I can tell you right now, the left kidney is linked to an issue with mom. And while it didn't specifically say mom, it did say with a female figure. And I said, of course, my mom and I, it was boom, and also followed up with plenty of love. We always knew we loved each other. There would be physical embrace, hugs, kisses, all that good stuff. But I had some parts of me that I never really did the work to discover. I've always been a very sensitive, emotional person since my youth, and I didn't look into that. And when we have repressed emotions that then come out in anger, I'm a firm believer that's another thing that will trigger a tumor growth. So that's something I've worked on a lot. I express myself a whole lot better. I'm far more in line with a sense of purpose in life. And I think that's a big piece of it. There's a lot of different stories out there. Anita Morjani is one that pops into my mind that had a near-death experience. Body was just riddled with cancer. And based on her story, I mean, she crossed over while she was in the operating room, and she saw her dad. And her dad told her, you're not done. You're not staying here with me. You got to go back. And when she went back and she told the surgeons that she could hear the stories that the surgeon was talking about and what he said, it gives some credibility to her near-death experience, right? So all that stuff means so much to me, and I embrace that. And as I go down that list, I can't help but pull myself back. Here I am speaking with you on this Morozko podcast. I don't at all want to discredit the value that getting in that cold plunge has brought me and what role you've played in this journey for me. Getting cold. I mean, this morning I got in there and I took a video before I got in. I've got it set to 34 degrees, but it was at 32.9 as the filter was running and it was still cooling. I'm like, hey, that's a little colder than 34, but I still got in and I got that gasp reflex and oh boy, it got me, but I controlled my breathing. And I'd say within about 15 to 20 seconds, I feel that I tapped right into that mammalian dive reflex and my body calmed and my eyes were closed. And I was just in this place that I want everybody to experience. I even counted my breaths. I was in there for 4 minutes, and it was 13 breaths is all I took in 4 minutes. That's how much I slow my breathing.
Yep.
I mean, I'm the one doing it, and I'll tell you, it feels unbelievable. Like, how can you possibly just breathing at a rate of 13 breaths for 4 minutes, even just sitting here living is one thing, but to do it in 32.9 degree water submerged up to my neck just feels like there's no way. And I did it. So
the dive
that's my journey.
You out. Your heart rate will involuntarily drop. And we've seen people go down into the low 40s beats per minute when they're in the cold plunge, up to their neck, ice chunks floating around their ears. Your brain will drop down into a meditative state. And again, this is involuntary. Ironically, your brown fat is revved up. You're doing the non-shivering cold thermogenesis to defend your core body temperature, but oxygen consumption can actually go down when you're in the ice bath. And we wouldn't think about this because the respiratory mechanisms that the brown fat and the mitochondria are revving up to try and keep you warm would suggest to us intuitively oxygen consumption has to go up, right?
Right.
But your body knows it's preparing you for that dive so that you can go down and get the mussels or the fish or the whatever it is that your family needs to survive the ice age. Your body has these mechanisms built in that prepare you for foraging or wading or fishing in the cold water. And it's healthy for you, as you're discovering from your own MRI.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my favorite part about this too. This journey, yourself being tops on this list, the people that I've had the blessings to connect with and invite on my podcast and learn from, it on the scientific level in a way that I know more than the average person. I would say it's fair to say, being in the fitness industry for over 20 years, and I do study this stuff, but there's just this intuitive side, this sense of me that feels like, hey, I get this, even if I can't articulate it in a way that gets your Lane Norton to support it. You know what I mean? He's going to shit on whatever I may say the way I say it. And I can appreciate that because he's pulling from the studies. But, talking to you, talking to Carrie Bennett, Sarah Kleiner and the likes, I'm in awe every time I listen to you all speak. But what it does is it gives me a deeper understanding, and it validates what I feel and what I'm living and what I'm going through. And I think the part that I try to be very careful of is I truly, the reason I'm sharing my story, the reason I'm so comfortable putting it out there is because it's not about patting myself on the back. It's about leading by example and empowering other people. So as I do it, I hope to tell it in a way that lowers the barrier to entry for many people so that they can make these changes before they're ever, given a diagnosis. Don't wait to feel sick to try to play the catch-up game. Do it now so it never happens, because it is all these technological advancements we have that are messing with our physiology and our biology that gets us sick to begin with, to then try to play catch-up and rush to the ER and rush to the doctor. It's not a deficiency of pills, injections, and surgery that is the reason you feel the way you do. It's because you're so far removed from nature. And, one of the things that you said to me on my podcast that means the world to me, when I hear somebody as successful as you, running a business the way that you are, creating such a phenomenal device, the first thing you said is, Jeffrey, not everybody needs a Morozko. If you have cold running water in your backyard, get out and get into it. Don't go out and spend all the money on this device. But if, like yourself, you live in Arizona, good luck trying to keep that tub cold enough with those bags of ice, right? And that's just... it's so powerful to me where that comes from. That's a place of truly wanting to change lives versus what the pharmaceutical industry has done, which shits on any alternative and says, no, this is what you need to do. But then we look at the statistical data that says, but it's not really successful. So this paradigm shift is so special. And I honor the role that I have to play in it by just leading by example. And, there's this sense I have that when your thoughts, your beliefs, and your actions are in alignment, that's when you create that reality. So for some people, they might not have the same thoughts, beliefs, and actions that I do. And I'm not going to try to convince them that they have to do what I'm doing. They may feel called to have the system be a part of their equation. And I support that and I encourage that. If that's what you feel called to do it, but also leverage the other side. The people in my life that have been cancer survivors are the people that have really looked for everything they possibly could, many of which are just holistic avenue. But quite a few have gone pretty standard of care too, but they thought, they believed, and their actions matched that this is what they needed to do.
Then there are two things for us to talk about: the physical and the metaphysical. In the physical domain, there is metabolism and mitochondria and how the tumor cells operate. In the metaphysical domain, there are the beliefs like fear. There are the meaning that we make out of our experience in the cold plunge or our experience with our parents. In the metaphysical, there are those things that cannot be reduced to the biochemistry of the body. And I want to talk about them both. But we may as well start, since I'm an engineer rooted in physical science, with the physical. It sounds like you've been following the work of Thomas Seyfried, who has this really convincing critique of what he calls the somatic mutation theory, and instead says that cancer originates in defects of mitochondria, not in mutations that exist in the nucleus. He says those mutations are downstream of damaged mitochondria. And he's got some really good lab data to show it. There's no such thing as a tumor cell with an intact mitochondria, according to Seyfried. But there are examples of tumors that have intact nucleus. That is, the DNA in their nucleus is sound, but the mitochondria are defective. For me, this is convincing, and it speaks to your advice to get ahead of cancer. That is, to care for the mitochondria before you get a diagnosis. Where Seyfried is weaker, I think, or less convincing, is he talks about starving the cancer. And he goes on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And he says, oh, it's very simple. You know, you get the glucose out because tumor cells metabolize glucose by fermenting it to produce ATP. They bypass the mitochondria. Well, they can also ferment glutamate. Now, glutamate is a lot easier or a lot more difficult. Glutamate is a lot more difficult to eliminate. And so he says you have to press, pull, shut down the glutamate, and then turn it back on. The irony for me in Seyfried is he never talks about the mitochondria. He talks about starving out the fermentation that supports the tumor cell proliferation, but he never talks about restoring the mitochondria. And so that's a jumping off point for talking about cold plunge therapy and some of the other things that you're doing. But it sounds like you might have your own understanding of Seyfried, and I'm hoping that you'll explain it to us.
I've definitely listened to quite a bit of his work, and I'm with you. You know, there's two sides of it. I feel like he's a brilliant man in his, with no disrespect intended, a very narrow view of it. And, you know, I think Jack's talked about this a lot too, that when all you talk about is the food side of it, you're missing a massive equation. I mean, when you don't talk about the light component, you've missed the point. So I think if Seyfried would be willing to take some criticisms and recognize that where he's right, he's nailing it, and where he's wrong, he's so far off that it's losing a lot of credibility, it feels like. I mean, I saw him on with Logan on Sowing Prosperity, and Logan brought up Gilbert Ling's work and talking about ATP, and, you know, that isn't the only source of energy. And Seyfried kind of scoffed at it and just dropped it. He said, well, if ATP is not the only source of energy, well, I don't know where else it's coming from. And that was it. He ended it. I said, boy, that's so limiting. Like, for somebody that's that brilliant, that's a very short-sighted view, especially for those of us that are in a state of, we've had a diagnosis and we're looking for some answers. And if he's getting put up on this pedestal as full of answers and he scoffs at a part of it that is a massive part of it, well, that's where you start to lose people, you know? So to say that I have a thorough understanding would be, I'll say incomplete, but I've followed enough of his work to say that what he does talk about that makes sense, I've implemented, and where he falls short, that's where I make sure to leverage it. It's my blue light glasses that I've got on right now. These are my daytime ones. I wear the amber lens ones when I'm up earlier than the sun, which is nearly every day, especially this time of year. And any minute I spend awake after sunset, those amber ones get put on, along with, when I'm indoors, you see, I've got my hat, I've got the glasses, I've got a hoodie on. I protect my eyes and my skin from that light. But when I get outside, and we're talking year round, it is shirts are coming off, hats coming off, glasses are coming off. I want my body to get the signal from the environment, the temperature, the light, everything that we have going on, to let the body know down to that mitochondrial level, where am I? And eat the foods to match that environment. So if it's, as we spoke at the retreat, I kind of painted a picture of my common eating habits. Even at that time in June, I rattled off a bunch of meats and different things like that. And you kind of looked at Kelsey and smiled. You said, it sounds like he's in the winter. And I said, well, wait a minute. I do eat some local produce too. I do have some fruits and vegetables in there. So I'm fully aware of that dynamic. And, I don't claim to be perfect, but I do try to make the adjustments as it gets brought to my attention. So yeah, it's that light.
You live in New York State. You're
yes,
a couple of hours drive north of the city. And when I lived in New York, it was northern New York or western New York, a long, long away from the city. But when I was there in June, I was looking for blueberries. I was looking for peaches, because there's a lot of fruit that is grown in New York. It's in season then. Maybe later towards the early fall, you're looking for apples. These things they can be considered high carbohydrate sources. And everybody knows, I should say, everybody who listens to this podcast knows that a ketogenic diet will improve cancer treatment outcomes. Siegfried is aware of this as well. Well, should we be afraid of the peaches, and should we be afraid of the blueberries and the apples when they're in season in New York?
Not at all. Nope. So for a multitude of reasons, right?
You'll still take in some carbohydrates when they're in season.
Yes, sir. I'd say for a multitude of reasons too. I look at food, true food, right? Unfortunately, our food industry has taken over what food really is. Food is information for the body with a barcode from the sun, from light. It's pulling it all in. And when we take it in, we're getting that information along with some nutrients, along with some fiber, so much else in there. And when it is grown in the local soil, preferably done in an organic way or a regenerative way, it is truly teeming with this organic matter, all that, this diverse microbiome from the soil getting converted up into this edible form that we then put into our body to feed our microbiome and to give the body this information. I mean, you cannot go wrong with that, especially, again, my sense is true food is never going to be the answer to any form of disease. It is the processed garbage, the food-like substitutes that are potentially going to feed some disease, but it's the further away from the environment we get, the further indoors we get, artificial light, we're feeling a year-round 68 to 72 degrees, no matter where we live, whether it's 100 degrees outside or 12 degrees outside, the body feels 68 to 72, and that's a total state of chaos. There's no coherence with the environment, and I think that's where a lot of things like tumors and cancers and all disease can stem from.
You said food is information first, and this is very confusing to people. I'm going to go on a little bit of a Professor Seager lecture on thermodynamics to try and help people with that, and then we're going to get on to light. The history of thermodynamics is confusing for so many people. They might touch on it in high school and then pray that they never have to, get back into it. My civil engineering students, it's one of their least favorite courses. But I teach the history of thermodynamics. The The origin of thermodynamics was actually the second law. The second law came before the first, and it was to solve problems in heat engines. Ben Bickman talks about this, how the idea of a food calorie goes all the way back to the same equations that were invented to master locomotives, you know? So it was Carnot's formulation that is credited with the second law of thermodynamics about the ideal operation of a heat engine. It was all about heat transfer and this concept of entropy, which doesn't exist. It can't be measured. There's no such thing as an entropy sensor or an entropy meter. Entropy is a made up concept that is meant to describe the difference between two thermodynamic states. It's not like temperature. It's not like volume. It's not like mass. It is a made up thing that doesn't exist, but can be described when you have a reference state and a new thermodynamic state, and help people solve problems. But after heat transfer, the big set of problems that came up were problems of mass transfer. Mass transfer is chemical engineering, whereas the heat transfer was mechanical engineering. So now we don't have to go hunt whales anymore to light the lamps of Philadelphia, because Drake drilled a well in Pennsylvania and he discovered oil. Rockefeller consolidates the oil refineries, you know, from Standard Oil, headquartered in Cleveland. And we have this whole new industry to make kerosene for lamps instead of whales. But what are we going to do with the other fractions of the petroleum? Rockefeller correctly saw a market in plastics as material, and a whole new industry of chemical engineering was created. It was chemical engineering that gave us chlorofluorocarbons. It was chemical engineering that gave us DDT, brominated flame retardants, phthalates, the PFAS, the forever chemicals. It was chemical engineering that we had to adapt this concept of energy to understand mass transfer so we could control these reactions. And that's primarily due to J. Willard Gibbs, who is the first person in the United States to graduate with a doctorate in engineering. Finally, it was Claude Shannon at MIT who noticed that there is the flow of information that can also be expressed in terms of entropy. So entropy used to mean heat transfer, and then it was expanded to mean mass transfer. And then Claude Shannon, who helped launch our understanding of digital circuits and computers, noticed that entropy could also be applied to information transfer. Heat, mass, and information is the way that it was discovered by our physicists and engineers. But in the body is not a steam engine. The body is not a chemical engineering reactor. These are all very poor metaphors. In the body, we respond in the other order: information, material, and then energy. The fact that they were discovered in the reverse order of importance to the body is very confusing. And so you have people saying, well, you know, weight is controlled by calories in, calories out, as if we were, you know, a motor in a car. And it's not that at all. We need to think of food first as information transfer, then material transfer. The fats that you eat are incorporated in your body. They're not all metabolized. They're used to make phospholipids. They're used to make nerves. They're used to make your brain. If you have the wrong type of fats, in particular seed oils, which are too rich in omega-6, then your brain doesn't work. The membranes of your mitochondria and your cells, the phospholipids that are made up of these fats, they don't work either. And so you lose mitochondrial function when you eat too many seed oils. That's the material component. Energy is the least important thing about your food. However, if you're Coca-Cola and you want to convince people to drink more soda and eat more foil-wrapped snacks, then you say, oh, you know, the information component doesn't really matter. The material component is irrelevant. We're going to reduce everything to calories, and we're going to put that on the food label as if that was the only important thing for you to consider. I don't know why you're so sick. What you're bringing up when you say food is information first is that it signals your body. It says peaches are abundant right now, or it says fish are abundant right now. Your diet must be in concordance with your temperature and your light environment. for you to stay healthy. If you're eating the blueberries that are flown up from Chile or Argentina, and you're eating them in New York State in January because you love blueberries, your diet is out of concordance with all the other signals that you're supposed to be getting from your environment. And it is no wonder that your body is confused. And I think you have a very strong basis for saying the food is a signaling mechanism first. It tells your body how to respond to the environment that you're in. And it can confuse your body when it isn't in alignment with your light and your temperature environment. I see you nodding your head, and it sounds like, yes, you've thought about these things too.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, anytime you have me on, lecture away. I love it. This is truly my favorite part about having a podcast myself is I love when my guest just fills me in with information. And right now I'm getting the same thing. I feel like I have a one-on-one opportunity for you to teach me, and this is incredible. So I'm taking it. And yeah, I mean, you're spot on. There is an element of understanding that I do have. That's why I share what I share. And I do my best not to share something if I share something I don't know definitively. I share it from a place of here's how I feel or here's what I do, not necessarily here's what somebody else should do. I don't want to promote myself as being an expert if I am not. But yeah, you just touched upon quite a bit that I didn't know of. But yeah, that you got to the crux of it, that my understanding of food being information more than anything. I mean, so much so that we know mitochondria transfers the transferable form of food through what we know as the electron transport chain, because really it's electrons is the usable form of energy in the body. It isn't calories. And with that in mind, I mean, we get electrons from grounding. We get electrons from the sun. And that goes back to Ling's work that we can't just through that electron transport chain and making ATP cannot be the only source of energy in the body. There's just no way we can make enough of it. So picking up those free electrons in nature ultimately, and then the charge separation of water, adding in even more, the deeper layers I begin to understand of this, following as many people as I have, it connects, it clicks, it checks off another box that I'm like, oh, now I get it. That makes way more sense. So, I mean, I got to be honest, this is like confession moment. I think back to, I alluded to how bad my diet was in my youth, even in, studying the body and wanting to get into the fitness industry. So I would say this was done prior to officially being in the fitness industry and being a trainer, but through that calorie model, you use the example of Coke, but you can use any processed food company. They got me with exactly what you just alluded to. In my mind, I said, all right, well, at my current weight, my current fitness level, I need somewhere north of 2,000 calories a day. And I remember eating an entire box of Cheez-Its thinking, well, that's still lower than my entire calorie need for the day. So that's great. Good. And I looked at the breakdown of the macros in it, and I'm like, all right, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. And I can make up for the other stuff later and get some protein in later and such. But I mean, literally eating an entire box of Cheez-Its thinking I'm giving my body what it needs. How asinine is that? And then
I'd rather you eat a whole wheel of cheese. The hell with 100% the cheese.
Right.
Just eat the damn
That's
cheese.
Exactly right. Exactly. Especially if it went through the proper process of being fermented and had the wax on the outside, right? Real cheese. I agree. But it's interesting. And that plays right into that dynamic of recognizing that I played an active role in this tumor existing in my body. I'm not a victim. Nobody did this to me, even though I could look on the other side and say, well, I was lied to by the food industry and they're the reason I did stupid things like that. Well, maybe, but nonetheless, I did it. So it's my responsibility to now make the change and not feel like somebody did this to me, so now somebody needs to come save me. That's just not how life works. It's we live our life, we have our experiences, we make our decisions, right or wrong, and hopefully if it was wrong, you learn from it and you don't do it again. And that's where I'm at, and
well, this brings us a step closer to the metaphysical, but we're going to stay in the physical domain for a second. I had Dr. Naisha Winters on the podcast. She was 19 when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she survived it. She survived it. But I asked her, since we know that cancer originates in defective mitochondria, how is it that children can get cancer? Because they have not accumulated decades of mitochondrial injury. She pointed out that you inherit your mitochondria, of course, from your mother, who has inherited it from her mother. The mitochondria has its own DNA, and it is inherited exclusively along a maternal line. And it's even a little bit different. All of the eggs that your mother is ever going to produce were produced while she was an embryo, while she was in your grandmother's womb. And these eggs must be preserved for her entire reproductive life. One of them becomes you. And so Naisha encouraged me to think about the decades of experience that existed before your body that you have inherited along this maternal line. And it's not just the mitochondria, it is also the epigenome. The epigenome of this coats the DNA in your nucleus. The epigenome is what turns the expression of your genes on or off. So you might have some gene that, I don't know, Peter Attia tells is very bad for you. And so many people are going to die tomorrow because they've got the wrong gene or so. It's ridiculous in its extreme. When those genes are turned on, then it becomes unridiculous. It becomes important. But the epigenome controls whether the gene is expressed and functional or not. Now the question is, what controls the epigenome? It's the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the sensors to the environment. They do it in two ways. This is another lecture with no homework attached. But the mitochondria are the sensors that control the epigenome so that it can respond to the environment in two ways. The first one is it is the mitochondria that sense the metabolites. Digestion begins in your gut with a whole bunch of microorganisms that don't even really belong to you. They have their own DNA. They have their own agenda. And it is their job to convert food into the things that will enter your bloodstream so that your mitochondria can sense them, whether it's glucose or fatty acids, for example. Your mitochondria respond to the metabolites in your bloodstream. And the other thing they respond to is your light environment. In particular, infrared light will penetrate the skin, sometimes several centimeters, and it will stimulate the mitochondria. They cannot help because they are biophysical, but respond to the light to which they are exposed. And it is primarily these two signals, the metabolites in your bloodstream and the light environment to which you're exposed, that tell the mitochondria how the cells should be responding to this environment. And so this is what I mean about concordance between your diet, the metabolic signals, and your light environment. When they're confused, that is, when they are discordant, the mitochondria are like, okay, what genes are we going to turn on? What genes are we going to turn off? What are we even doing here, Jeffrey? And part of what you might be doing is responding to the epigenome that you inherited from your mother or your grandmother. You've said, I've made choices in my life. My tumor is, my responsibility, and it's true. It doesn't necessarily make it your fault. We're going to, disconnect responsibility, the ability to respond to some kind of moral blame. And this puts us on the cusp. We're on the threshold now of talking about the metaphysical. What does your tumor mean? What does it mean that you have decided to eschew the sort of centralized medicine, the allopathic standard of care, and take on your own program of treatment? And before we go all the way to the metaphysical, I should pause and allow you to respond to this latest dissertation on mitochondria as the antenna that control the functions of the nucleus.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking, I'm connecting more and more dots. You articulated it in a way a little different than I've either heard it before or, read about or shared it myself. But I spoke with Sarah Kleiner yesterday, and she essentially said the same exact thing, that it is the mitochondria that are sensing what's going on around it. And when we consider, it's Doug Wallace's work that taught us that we're getting the mitochondria from our mother's line, our mom and her mom and so on. And it's amazing. The more dots we connect, if we can keep looking at this from that, 60,000 foot view, instead of staring too close at one thing, we get lost in it. But if we just stay up here for a minute and start to realize, man, it makes more and more and more sense. And when we think about it from just a state of survival, so then I'll survival in the nervous system we'll talk about, but it makes so much sense that it would happen that way, that your grandmother is existing. What environment does she exist in as we as a species are trying to carry on, right? So if she's at a state of threat, but she is capable of having a child, now she passes that information on to her child, who already has within her the seeds for the next generation as well with same information. But that information isn't automatically expressed, to your point with the epigenome, that if you then are born into the world and you're safe and the information you then put in is in a state of coherence with the environment and you're putting in the right things, you can begin to thrive. But here we are, although we do live in a pretty safe time, we're treating our bodies as if we're in a very unsafe time, and it's all red lights are flashing in a bad sense, as red light therapy is really good for us, but, flashing like bombs are going off. This sympathetic state is survive, survive, survive. So we aren't thriving there. We don't feel safe there. And if you don't feel safe, then the wrong genes are being expressed. But when we feel safe, when we're putting in the right information, man, the mitochondria take that information in and they recognize we're safe and they express the right genes and we thrive. And that all makes so much sense to me. And that's why I love this role that I have to play in my time here. And interestingly, quick sidebar, in a meditation quite some time back, I had a very strong sense, just this intuitive sense that I'm going to live to at least 120. And when I was given my diagnosis, that didn't change. I knew this is great. I'm still going to live to 120. And this is just another obstacle on the way that is going to allow me to share my story to help empower other people to recognize how safe we really are. And if you don't think you are, listen, there are some people, I get it. Some people aren't right now. So if you're not safe, find a way to get safe. But for the overwhelming majority of us, we are, but you don't feel it because you're staring at your phone all day long. You're watching the news and being told how the world's going to end tomorrow. But if you just look at your local community, you look at your family, you look at your friends and your neighbors, and you speak to people, man, it's a beautiful time to be alive. And then we start to give those mitochondria the right information to sense so that we can thrive and we can express the proper genes to thrive.
So what we've described so far about mitochondrial inheritance and the inheritable characteristics of the epigenome, that is, parents will pass on the epigenome, not just the chromosomes in their DNA, but their expression in the epigenome to their children. We now realize that, Jeffrey, you have been tasked with healing injuries that your ancestors suffered. And you have been tasked in a physical way through this material, inheritance. But we're now into the metaphysical domain. What does it mean that you have this challenge in your life, which is embodied as a tumor, and you must heal yourself? It was Dr. Bruce Lipton who pointed out in one of his books, I think it was The Biology of Belief, that the cells in your body have no choice but to respond to the signals that they get from your thoughts. And so you're thinking something, and this creates a field, or it communicates through the nervous system, and all these biological, biophysical entities must respond to those thoughts. When you're telling yourself a different story about what it means to have a tumor, it changes your thoughts and your cells must respond differently. So now we see, is it the physical that guides the metaphysical? Or, as I believe, is it the other way around? Is it the metaphysical that leads the physical within the constraints of thermodynamics and the physical world? It is the metaphysical that steers the actions of the cells. And it sounds like you have undergone your own journey of storytelling or story crafting and making meaning out of your experience. I'm hoping that you'll share it with us.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Dr. Lipton. I'd say Dr. Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza were two of the primary drivers of this. And the further I understood the role that that played, read the biology of belief. I've listened to a lot of Dr. Lipton. I think I've read all three of Dr. Dispenza's books that I know of. Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself was probably the most powerful for me when I look back and I think the role that a victim mentality played in my life and my outcome, and then recognizing, taking Dr. Lipton's work and doing the work. Like I didn't know in my conscious awareness that even existed, that my subconscious programming, and now we just scratch the surface much deeper, that this concept of the mitochondria, the epigenome, all that being passed on to me from my mom, who had a very similar mentality, a similar or survival mechanism, I guess. I've done an awful lot of work over the years of reprogramming my subconscious because of the work of those two gentlemen. And it has been profound in my life. I've watched my relationships with others change. I've watched on a level that sounds a little woo-woo. It's as if I've moved on a different plane, and the people that I used to be exposed to, that I would react to, that if to use the buzzword, that would trigger me, I don't even see them anymore. They don't exist in my world anymore, which is strange to me because I didn't actively move away from them. I don't see them. I don't engage with them because we're just working on a different frequency now. And so much of that was absolutely due to that work from Dr. Lipton and understanding when you're stressed out, you're no longer in your conscious thinking mind. You revert to your programming, your subconscious. And that's kind of your default mode. And my default mode sucked. My default mode was reactionary and get angry and defend myself and be very, egoic. And, it wasn't me. It must have been your fault. It wasn't me at all. So that for sure played that role from an emotional state. Those emotions are awful. And that's only going to pull more chaos towards you. And when you can recognize that's how you're acting, whether you like it or not, you have to accept it. And then you do the work. So I just habituated better behavior. And it was kind of cool. I found out one day, part of my process was when something happened, I would tell myself, pause first, take a breath, and then respond instead of react. And I did that very consistently for a long time, and not 100% of the time, but it got better and it got better and it got better. And then one day in real time, I felt it. I didn't pause. I just reacted. But it was the most amazing thing that ever happened to me. It proved to me this whole process because my reaction was what I wanted my response to be. And I realized I was a different person. And it was the most amazing thing. And, sharing that story with people here in my clinic and empowering them to do the same, I think one of the most amazing things is the impact that I've been able to have on my clientele, ranging from preteen to my oldest client's 92 years old, everyone in between, regardless of my age and life experience, the lessons that I've learned when I convey it through just telling my own story. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm not telling them that they're wrong. I just share that this is what I made. These are the mistakes that I made. This is what I learned. This is what I changed. And this is what it did for me. And then they start to do the same thing. And they come back to me and say, Jeffrey, it worked. I did it too. That's the most empowering thing. It's so beautiful, and that's what this is all about. That is truly the essence of why I want to share this story. And man, I'll tell you what, the day that I get my clear scan, my celebration won't be for me because I already know that's my reality. My celebration will be for any of the naysayers that have been able to follow along. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about it now before the clear scan is here, so they see in my demeanor, see how in my delivery that I already know that to be true because of the work I've done. And I'm so grateful you brought this dynamic up, and Dr. Lipton specifically, because I give him a ton of credit here, even though I've never met him and spoke with him.
Let's get back to the fear, because if the COVID lockdowns taught us anything, it is that fear is a reliable mechanism of control. I see this in bureaucracies, for example. I see this at Arizona State University in my faculty role. We set up these rules and processes and procedures. And of course, because we're a bureaucracy, we outline the punishments and the negative consequences that will happen if you fail to follow these processes. And the whole thing revolves around reliability, not creativity, although we're supposed to be a knowledge enterprise, not innovation, although we put that on the sides of the bus, as if we're celebrating it. Fear is the only reliable mechanism of control. What would a person in love do? Like incredibly unpredictable things. We can't have that in our factory. We must instill fear to turn the people into the machines that make us rich. And so our whole industrial culture revolves around creating that fear, and the medical establishment has raised it to a new art. You were describing some of the conversations that you're having with your urologist or your oncologist about all the reasons that you have to submit to surgery and let them cut you open or you're going to die. We see the same kind of fear mongering in other issues unrelated to health, but it is at its apogee in vaccines. If you don't get vaccinated, then your children are going to die. Whatever there's no data supporting this, but whatever the message is that is meant to scare you into doing something is meant to turn you into a reliable cog in an industrial machine to make someone else rich. But Jeffrey, I can almost hear our audience asking, what if your approach doesn't work? What if the doctor is right? What if the scan comes back and one day the tumor is bigger or the blood markers are going in the wrong direction? What if you're wrong, Jeffrey? That's the fear creeping back in. What do you respond to the people who, it seems like a legitimate question.
Sure. Well, I have two responses. Just because as you were talking, there's something that popped into my mind. I literally just heard it this morning that says, we only have as many masters as we have vices. You're only going to be able to be scared into doing something by that power on this side if you have the vice that says, but I really want this thing. And if doing this thing is going to result in what you're telling me, then, okay, tell me what I need to do so I can keep doing this thing. I had no fear. There isn't that vice, whether it's alcohol, drugs, food, whatever it is. And there was just this deep intuitive knowing that, call it God, call it the universe, call it source, whatever we want to call it. I understood in that moment that I was being communicated with and through that you're going to be okay. But a more direct answer to the question, and I'm giving it right back to you because you said it to me on my podcast, is if this does not work, who does it hurt? Me. That's it. Right? Maybe emotionally, my family, my loved ones, but that's it. Right? But who does it help? Everybody else. Because there's information in the example set forth. So, that's the bottom line. Like, I don't have an ounce of fear. I don't have an ounce of concern. I don't have an ounce of disbelief that it will work, which is the reason it wasn't a choice I made. There was no choice. I had a dear friend of mine say it, along those lines, like, man, why is he not, he's got a family, he's got a wife, he's got kids, he's got a house, a business, all these things. What do you mean he's not doing anything? And then he caught himself and he said this to me, in person. He said, of course you're doing something. You're just not doing the thing that everybody else is doing and what the system's trying to teach you. And that is the power. This is why we are in this place of we're watching the disempowerment paradigm crumble and panic and freak out because we're ushering in the empowerment paradigm. I've empowered myself through the help of people such as yourself, Dr. Dispenza, Dr. Lipton. That list goes on because this self-care journey of mine is something that, I could say it's been my entire life, but actively for 15 to 20 years. And because of the role I play in the fitness industry, I remember hearing from a client years ago that I was unrelatable because in her eyes, I was this picture of health already. I was somebody that it must have come easy to because I was already fit. I didn't battle with weight my whole life, which interestingly isn't entirely true because I went through phases that sure it's relative to only my situation, right? But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't like what I saw and it didn't match what I felt like. It didn't match what I felt like I was supposed to be. But because I was told I was unrelatable, I said, well, man, if I want to reach as many people as I want to reach, I have to be relatable. So maybe I can show them that I can still eat the burgers, eat the pizza, drink the beer, and stay fit. So I guess that's what I'll do. And what I realized is I was trying to fit in somebody else's image of me as opposed to be my authentic self and do what I was called to do. And that's a very easy change when you spend the time with yourself and you stop worrying about what other people might think of you and you do what you feel called to do. You feel what feels right to you. That's it. And there's no fear. I'm not worried about what somebody else thinks. I'm not worried about what somebody else might say and, talk about me. That's all right. As soon as that separation happens, you're free. And when you're free, I think that's where the true healing can begin.
There is an interesting irony here. When Charles Lindbergh flew solo across the Atlantic, at the beginning of aviation, he was celebrated as a hero for taking those risks and proving what the machine and the man was capable of doing together. We all knew that if he disappeared into the ocean, the only person that would perish is him. And so we're like, we want you up in that sky. We want you doing these heroic things. And yet, when the bodybuilders at Venice Beach, in California in the 70s, started shooting themselves up with steroids so that it could get bigger, they were demonized. We said, no, this is bad and you shouldn't do that. Nobody was saying, let's see what happens. Thank you for living out on that biochemical edge to see what the real capacity of the human body is. We owe them a debt of gratitude. People like Mark Bell, who shot himself up with enough steroids to kill a horse. And I'm exaggerating. I'm not a doctor. I don't really know what the prescription is. He's out there talking about the sugar diet, which I think is like, my immediate reaction, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, Mark. And I like Mark. I consider Mark a friend. But Mark is taking the risks that the rest of us don't have to take. He's the one flying solo across the Atlantic, and yet he's doing it by adding sugar to his smoothie drink or something, and then he's reporting out to the world. This is what happened to me when I went to 95% of my caloric intake from sugar. And we're all learning something from the chances, from the risks that he's taking. For someone to come to you and say, well, you're an idiot, you're foolish, kind of the way I started this podcast off, right? And to disparage you or to make some moral accusation of you, it's all counterproductive. What we should be doing is cheering you, checking in on you, saying, how are you doing? Treating you like a hero from which we are all going to learn because you're willing to take these chances. This is, again, the metaphysical. It changes the meaning of what you're attempting to do. And human beings are storytelling, meaning-telling creatures. One meeting can have all of the cells and the energy that flows through our body sort of deflated and in a low state of creativity and in a low mood. When you make a different meaning out of it, now all of a sudden we're inflated, we're high energy, and we're creative. We sometimes see this in sports. What does it mean that Tom Brady's team is down by 21 points in the middle of the Super Bowl, or whatever the hell? One thing it could mean is that they're all incompetent, they're getting their butts kicked on national TV, and they should be embarrassed. Another thing that it might mean is that they're about to, start the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, and they're going to do it on this next play. Which story do you think Tom Brady's telling in the huddle? It's very clear, right? That meaning making changes our future. And you have decided to create a new story, a new meaning of your tumor, and how you can use that experience to serve other people better in your profession as a trainer and as an educator. This is remarkable, Jeff. You should be celebrated for the courage, not denigrated for, foolishness. You're an N=1 longitudinal study in oncology right now. And this is why I want to stay in touch.
Yeah, I look forward to it. We will. And I love the two examples you just used. It's interesting. I actually had the opportunity to work with and get to know Mark Bell's older brother, Mike, before he passed. And the whole family, Chris, his younger brother, Chris, as well, they are very active. They're very in alignment with what they believe they're supposed to be doing. And it's making a name for themselves. Chris and all his documentaries, he's done a phenomenal job. And talking about kratom and the different things that's done for him. And, Mark with his slingshot and his steak shake and all that type of stuff. I love what they're doing. And it's interesting too, that you bring up Mark and then Tom Brady with regards to the haters, if you will, right? Because I can tell you what, without speaking to either of them in person, I know they aren't even thinking about the haters. They don't follow along with the comments. It isn't making them lose sleep at night. They're doing what they're called to do because that's what matters. And that's what makes them the level of success that they are. And I have a sense that my story will end up bringing my family some degree of financial security, I'll call it. I don't know which way it'll go, whether it's writing my book, speaking to large groups and just telling my story. What did I do? What worked? But if that's to happen, whether it does or not, doesn't matter. But if that's to happen, I think it's simply because my focus isn't that that's the end result. My focus is I'm doing what I'm doing with a level of conviction that the average person can't quite grasp, and it's not their own fault. We have been programmed in this paradigm. I mean, you mentioned the Rockefellers earlier and the whole petroleum-based thing. You're going back, 1910 was the Flexner Report. So we're coming in at the end of a 115-year run of being programmed into this medical paradigm, which is really, I don't like giving it credit of calling it medical or health. It's a business plan, and a really, really successful one that has indoctrinated people for a very long time. And my favorite thing to see is the number of doctors who have studied within that paradigm, practiced within that paradigm, only to say, hey, the results aren't working. This isn't what I got into this for. What else can I do? And they've pivoted into some functional medicine, which was a little bit better, but not all the way there. And a lot of them are now getting into this quantum biology space and recognizing, wow, we've been lied to. Again, our ailments are not a deficiency of pills, injections, surgery. Overwhelmingly, they are a deficiency of being connected with nature, because this incredible thing that we've been gifted with, the design here, is rooted to be directly connected to nature, being in coherence with nature. And the more we do that, the more we thrive. And I can't pretend to be the expert in all those things, but it speaks to me at a very deep level. And my role, rather than being the expert or the white coat, my role is to be let me lead by example. Let me do it. Let me put it into practical application, reap the benefits myself, which I'm doing. I mean, if I'm honest, since my diagnosis, I've probably had 4 or 5 days of pretty severe discomfort, 2 of which were pretty awful. I have not resorted to even a pain pill through that. I feel like each time I have a symptom like that, each time I have an episode like that, there's a lesson for me to learn, and I embrace it. And even though it sucks, I say, all right, maybe there was something else I did that brought on this set of symptoms, and maybe this is simply my body doing its job. Maybe what I did was so far back, and it's just the healing process that is working its way to get this stuff out of me. Whichever it is, that's my role to play, and that's where I learn those hard lessons, and that's what I can share with people. And that's not to say that, hey, if you're going through something similar, don't take pain pills. If you feel called to and you want to do it, you do you. I support you. But yeah, for me, there's just a very clear, very illuminated path for me to follow. And as I document it, and as you and I stay in touch and we share this information, when that time comes that my clear scan happens, we will have a recipe that worked for at least, as you alluded to, an N of 1, and we can pull from it.
Well, why? Thinking about the physical and the metaphysical again, why should anyone follow your example of doing ice baths like you are doing?
That's a great question. Well, you know all the science side of that, and I know I could scratch the surface on some of it, but man, I'll tell you again, from the standpoint of just being somebody that does it, it feels incredible. There's an element, if you're somebody that has difficulty doing hard things, just get started. Start in the cold shower. Start by going outside, depending on where you live. If it's cold enough outside, go out in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, go outside in a pair of shorts and no shirt, hang out for 10 to 15 minutes, get yourself a little shiver, and just see how your body responds. I mean, it's amazing to think about. We've been told for so long now, hey, put your jacket on or you'll catch a cold. I mean, it's such lunacy, right? Like, how quickly after getting cold, you feel your body get really, really warm. That's the body's response to it, right? I mean, mitochondria generating infrared light, which is heat. And even if you haven't gotten cold adapted yet, you shiver, and then that's going to warm you up, right? Or you strategically go get your workout in, and that warms you up, which that's a whole nother topic that we didn't go too deep into, but my testosterone has been increasing. You'll see that in my labs as well. Yeah, right. It's pretty cool to see. I knew it would just based on listening to you, but it's like to see the numbers go up. It's like, all right, I'm in. I'm keeping this going. But there's the physiological side of it. There's just it's awe-inspiring. You know, as I touched upon earlier, I don't know if we had hit record yet or not, but I was in there this morning and I've got it set to 34 degrees, but it was at 32.9 as the filter was running and it was chilling. And I said, all right, well, we're still getting in. And I set my phone timer for my 4 minutes. And the first couple of seconds, you get that gasp reflex, but I controlled my breathing and eyes were closed. And it was just how quickly that mammalian dive reflex kicks in. And my breath rate was the same as when I'm in a meditation in my room here with my red lights on and all that. It's like, man, in 32.9 degree water, naked for what it's worth, my body is just calm in this meditative state. That is awe-inspiring. Why would we not want to test that and see? You know, if for no other reason, prove us wrong. Get in there and do it for your 10 to 14 days. And you don't have to start at 32.9 degrees for 4 minutes. As you say, cold enough to gasp, long enough to shiver. Do it for 10 to 14 days until you get cold adapted. And then let us know, how did it feel? Did you really not like it? Because I'll tell you what, I've spoken to people who have healed their Raynaud's disease, all these different results that you're hearing from people that they had such an aversion to cold previously, but now they can't not go in. And then that's where I'm at. I mean, I do not do it every single day for one reason. I don't want to be obsessive. I want to use it and leverage it to the point that I'm getting the healing benefits, but I don't want to be obsessive. And I continue to want to lower the barrier to entry for everybody else. So over the past 90 plus days, I've averaged 6 days a week. So it's, you know, it's a lot, but I love the way I feel. I love the high that I have afterwards. I've done multiple times in a day before because I want to get that boost again. And oh, by the way, even though here I am, if you want to use the lingo, I'm a cancer patient, but I don't get sick. Mm-hmm. I don't get colds. I don't get sick. You know, when my family and I got COVID, quote unquote, it was some sniffles and a little cough. And when the test came back positive, I was like, really? And oh, by the way, that was back in like 2022, I think. But yeah, this is why do it? Because it works, man. It's another of these remarkable things that if you truly want to feel good, stop seeking comfort, seek discomfort, embrace the suck, and watch how that resiliency kicks in. And that's how the body thrives. You know, deliberate exposure to things that are a challenge will give the body that response, that hormetic response of getting stronger, getting more capable. And it makes this challenging life so much more enjoyable. And yeah, if you want to be healthy, take on some of these challenges like getting in a cold plunge.
What this podcast is doing for me is moving me closer to the metaphysical. I understand the brown fat. I understand the insulin sensitivity. I understand the mitochondria. I understand the parasympathetic dive, reef. All these things are wonderful. The neuroprotective factors that are produced by brown fat and associated with brain health and wonderful things. What happens for me when I get in the ice bath is that the fears and anxieties that I'm carrying melt into the water. When I come out, I don't have them anymore. Then I'm ready for my day.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, right? That's the whole biofield talk and this, what water is. I mean, the grounding effect that the Morozko offers us and how that alone has this connection. I mean, there's just something deeper than I think we understand yet. It seems like there's quite a few people getting closer and closer. I've just always been more of the practitioner. I'm going to apply it, but I really admire the scientist side of it.
This is wonderful. Jeffrey, thank you for joining me and explaining to our audience the courageous journey that you're undertaking so that you can be that conduit of knowledge to others who are still struggling with the fear side.